No, right where we see the view across the street from.
Oh, this was
the
back in November.
Yeah, I guess I
So the
just.
four corners.
When Tina had the whole.
Or the staves and those ones.
Whatever.
You saw
I just thought that was maybe a little more.
I figured out some audio with my need.
Yeah, it looked like there had
You think
been
you're good now?
a little bit of investigation. A couple of days later, we got back with a little clock.
That's the one.
And we dug like. We had 2 or 3 layers of
Okay,
bad. Welcome to the first town council meeting of the year 2025. And we've got a nice agenda today. And I think I'll first call for citizen input. We have something, Mark? Ready? You do
No,
not.
thank you.
Okay. Any other citizens willing to address the council? And if not, do we have anybody online? Or did anybody send anything in?
We did get, I think, one comment since the last meeting, and that was forwarded to the council.
Okay,
That was from John
John.
Okay.
Hey, oh yes, okay, got it.
about the red snake and.
Yes.
Thoughtful comment.
Okay, in that case, we'll turn to Polly, who I suspect is will be on the screen shortly to talk about the Open Public Meetings Act.
I think
I'm
Kim,
identifying as Polly today,
Identifying as Polly.
so
Hey, Cameron, thank you.
very welcome. I don't know how good of a job I'll do for representing Polly, but I'll do my best. So this is the training to comply with the annual requirement for open and public meetings training for elected officers. So essentially, this is going to cover what the Open Meetings Act is, what the notice requirements are, and what the restrictions are for public officials to meet. So essentially, the purpose of the Open Meeting Act is to ensure that the people's business is done in an open and transparent form. And so the very basic summary is that we're supposed to take action on the people's business openly in a public meeting. We're supposed to make those decisions openly. We're supposed to deliberate openly, which is actually the most difficult part because the lines change quickly from a casual conversation to perhaps something that would be deliberation or discussion. And then we're supposed to just conduct the people's business so that they have access to the information that is relied upon and the decisions that are made. And so when I use the phrase openly or open meeting, it means an open public meeting. And so the act is Utah Code 52.4. There's a number of sections in there. So if you have questions about that, either contact Polly or I, or feel free to take some casual reading and read the statute. If you have any questions as I'm going through this, feel free to jump in and interrupt me. But I'm just going to kind of bust through this because I think most everyone has been familiar with this and been through this training at least once before. So the Open Meetings Act applies to any local administrative, advisory, executive, or legislative body that consists of 2 or more individuals that spends, distributes, or is supported by tax money, or has authority to make decisions about the public business. And so that includes advisory groups. And so this is a little bit of a distinction between a quorum and who is subject to the act. So it's 2 or more individuals in a public body. Any questions about that? Okay. So what is a meeting? And this is the one that is important to remember. A meeting is a quorum. So in our case, it's going to be 3 or more members of the council that are convened. And the important part is second bullet point that's underlined, that they're having a meeting for the purpose of discussing, receiving comments, or acting upon a matter over which the public body has jurisdiction or advisory power. So the requirements for the open meeting are conditional. So if you don't have a quorum, meaning, meaning at least 3 members, then it's not subject to the Open Meetings Act. If you're not having a discussion or receiving comments or acting on some type of business for the town, it is also not an open meeting. Now, again, this is where the devil's in the details. So is an email chain or an instant message chat or a text message or some other electronic chat, are those considered meetings? And the answer is a lawyer's favorite answer: it depends. So the reason it depends is if there are 3 members or more in that email chain or the instant message, text, or chat, and if you are discussing or taking action or receiving public comment on the town's business. So it really is context specific. And so you need to be aware of that and think through that anytime you have multiple people in an email chain. There was recently a news story about a government entity that was using a messaging app, and purportedly in the news story, the purpose of using the messaging app was to avoid records that are subject to GRAMA or that would avoid the Open Meetings Act. We do not want to do that. So if there's a slide later on that says if you intentionally or concertedly engage in activity to circumvent the Open Meetings Act, it's a violation. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that everything is open, etc. Any questions about any of those types of communications, email, instant message, chat, or anything else?
You said something about that it has to be a meeting for a purpose of sort of conducting business. So if the 3 of us happen to get on the chairlift together, or 3 people happen to want to go skiing together, but we're not gonna talk about the business or anything to do with the town, and it wasn't our purpose to do that, we can still convene. Or could still have dinner together.
I
Correct.
think so.
Yeah, good.
Yes, and you can even, you're not. It's not this awkward. Don't discuss anything about Alta. You can say, hey, are you guys planning on going to the council meeting this Friday? Or hey, that was a really good whatever. You just cannot deliberate, receive comment, or decide what you're going to act on. And so
You can
then
talk about something. No, you can talk about how you feel about something.
If it's not a town business.
What's your
Okay.
favorite
Oh,
cereal?
Gulf of America. How do you feel about Gulf of America?
Won't the Panama Canal. Okay.
Yeah.
So Mayor or Councilwoman Ansel, if you happen to have 3 people in a space, you can talk about anything but town business. Is that the simple way to, anything that's before the town is off the table?
Great.
So I've got a couple of examples here. So Councilmember Ansel, that's what you just described as a social event, right? So if you meet out in public, if you're all at the same type of event, etc., there's nothing wrong with meeting, socializing, etc. But like Jen just described, nothing that has to do with town business. There's a frequent pitfall, and it's the second one, the meeting after the meeting. So frequently, there will be the formal town council meeting, and then the meeting will adjourn, but everyone is still present. And so you want to be careful that after the meeting, you limit your discussions to only things that are social and that are not related to town business. And this really goes for, before the meeting, after the meeting, during the meeting even. There's a slide later on. During a council meeting, you cannot be emailing or texting other council members to discuss what's being on the agenda at the meeting, or something else for that matter. So the meeting has to be open and public to everyone, and everyone has to be able to hear the discussion the same as the council members are. And then the conference call is sort of just.
It's interesting that could we discuss state policy, state legislation or impending legislation or something like that, which, eventually might have some effect on the town.
So yeah, I mean, the safest answer would be if you think it's gonna be a matter that's gonna come before the town to make a decision or take action on, it's safer just to limit it to not a quorum or to not discuss it. But, you know, there's the big elephant in the room, the gondola, right? That's a big issue
Oh,
to
that
a
one.
lot of people in town. So, you know, currently the town's not a party to any action in that. It does obviously affect the town, but there's no pending business that would be about that. So there's nothing wrong with council members, you know, exchanging their ideas on politics or, you know, whatever the current, you know, sort of social media issue is. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, you can't make a decision or deliberate about a decision that you're going to take action on.
Great.
Conference call, I should have moved that up to the other instant messages. Same thing. If there's a quorum and you're discussing town business, then that's going to be an open meeting. This graphic that Polly has in is actually one of the better ones. So the Open Meetings Act is more cumbersome for municipalities to conduct business, and it's intentionally so. So frequently, we recognize that less than a quorum can participate in a discussion on an issue that concerns town business. But what we can't do is we can't have two council members in 5 separate conversations reach a consensus on what to do for the town's business, and then in an open meeting simply say, like this graphic says, hey, what we discussed in our email thread and at Larry's son's birthday party, say aye. Nobody knows what that discussion was. Nobody knows what we're voting on. So you can have those separate discussions between individuals with less than a quorum, but you cannot sort of behind the scenes reach a decision and then just come into an open meeting and say, hey, this is the matter that's before us. All those in favor agree. You have to lay out what the provision is. You have to have your deliberations. So some of that you may have to duplicate, you know, sort of discussions and express your viewpoints and your opinions on that. Any questions on any of that? Okay. This slide is in here just to recognize, even though this is Open Meetings Act, there are satellite effects to other sections of the statute. One of them is the Government Records Access Management Act. So emails, text messages, any other type of messaging apps, recordings of conversations, all of those things are considered government records. And so depending on the type of record and whether or not it has a substantive effect of the town's business, you may have to preserve those. So this is one of the reasons that we want to use the town email so that we can preserve those emails. We want to limit the use of personal devices, because if there's a grammar request, personal devices, personal email accounts are subject to disclosure under GRAMA. So just keep that in mind. Okay, the location of the meeting has some restrictions. So on the day of the regularly scheduled meeting, which is the monthly meeting, any other work session or closed session or sort of remote has to be at that one location. You have to start at that location unless we're deciding to meet somewhere for the whole meeting. And so this is only important if we're having more than one type of meeting. If it's a regularly scheduled meeting, it'll just be at the same anchor location. There are exceptions to that. If it's being held elsewhere, we just need to notice that in the public notice. If there's an emergency meeting, for example, if we couldn't get everyone to the location for the public meeting, we can hold it elsewhere. If it's held electronically, and there's some exceptions to that, or if it's site visit or traveling tour. I think we've done a number of those in the past. Oh, and I should have added in here for the emergency meeting, there are also special meetings that can be held, which is basically any meeting for the town council that is not the regularly scheduled meeting or an emergency meeting. And so in addition to those two, you can also have special meetings for some other purpose. So electronic meetings, this portion of the code changed significantly during and after COVID. So I don't know if you remember, but during COVID, the mayor had to issue a determination every 30 days to allow us to have a remote meeting without an anchor location. They've changed that a little bit. That requirement is still there under state law. We can have a meeting without an anchor location if the mayor issues a determination for certain reasons, and medical, public health crisis, or an emergency, or some of those. But for an electronic meeting, we have to have a resolution which adopts procedures. We did that in December of 2022 that lays out our electronic meeting procedures. The electronic meetings are subject to the same notice requirements as a regular meeting. It does require a single anchor location that the public can go and listen and participate at. So even if we're electronic, we have to have one location that the public can go participate at. So if we don't have that one location, we have to do the exception. And then we also have to have procedures for identifying council members and for taking votes. So we don't want to have an electronic meeting where all we have are black screens with council members' names on them, and the votes are with a thumbs up or a thumbs down, right? We want to be able to identify people either visually or by voice, or we want to know what phone call they're calling from, and then we need to make sure that we identify their votes when the votes come up. Any questions on that? Okay. We can also close meetings. You can close a meeting on purpose for only one reason, and that would just be published like you would normally post a meeting, or you can close a meeting during or after a regular meeting. So the reasons you can close it are listed here. There are some other ones that are in the statute that have to do with state agencies that don't apply to us. But essentially, to discuss an individual's character, professional competence, or physical or mental health, strategy sessions to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation, strategy sessions relating to real estate purchases or leases, and those are meant to protect the municipality's ability to get a good market price and negotiation without having to signal what it is that they're going to do with real estate. Oops. And then discussions regarding security personnel, devices, or systems, and investigative proceedings regarding allegations of criminal misconduct. All of those are reasons that we can close the meeting. And so for a closed meeting, it is generally limited to just the council and whatever staff are necessary to conduct that meeting. There's a couple of asterisks in these sections. If the meeting is closed, we do need to record the meeting to document what is discussed during the closed meeting. The exceptions to that are the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, and discussions regarding security personnel, devices, or systems. We do not have to record those. The mayor or whoever is leading the council in that closed meeting will have to sign an affidavit, essentially certifying that the only things that were discussed in that meeting were for the reasons that it was closed for. To go into a closed meeting, you do need a vote by a majority, and a motion and a vote by a majority of the quorum of the council members, and you need to also do that to exit the closed session and go back into an open meeting. These are just the notices or the requirements for a notice. Jen does a great job. She's very detailed and has gone through this enough. I think she probably has it memorized. But at least 24 hours before the agenda, the agenda must include the date, time, and place of the meeting, and must have specific enough information so the public can understand what is going to be discussed. So we can't just list, ordinance 2025-01-03 will be discussed. We have to actually give some description of what the topic of that ordinance is and what the considerations will be. The minimum notices must be placed on the Utah Public Notice website, the town's website, and then if it's an emergency meeting, we have to post it in locations within the town. We have to post it at the council member's address or send to them directly, personally notify them. And then we have to pass a ordinance that sets our regular meeting schedule for the year. So yeah, I think I covered I think that's a duplicate, actually. Okay, public comment. This is something that's not necessarily discussed as much in the Open Meetings Act, but it's relevant. So when there's an agenda item for public comment, that can be open for any discussion that the public wants to bring up. There is no requirement that the council members have a dialogue with the public member. You certainly can do that because sometimes it's helpful to actually just get the information, get some questions answered, and give some feedback. But on some topics, if they're really hot button issues, there may be so many public comments that it would make the meeting go on for 6 to 12 hours, depending on how many people are there. So we've passed procedures that require time limits and regulate the types of things that can be discussed. There can't be any threats or discriminatory comments, but we open it to the public, and if you want to engage with the public on an issue, on a topic of discussion, you can, but there's no requirement that you do that. The only issue is that since unless the topic raised by the public was on the agenda, we can't actually take any final action. Because if an item's not on the agenda, we can't take action on it. So a member of the public could raise an issue. It could be concerning and something the council wants to act on, but they could not act on it at that meeting. The minutes and the recordings are required for all public meetings and recordings for most closed meetings. The minutes have to be approved by the council and are released to the public, and they're considered public records after they approve. Draft and we have to post those within a certain number of days. Emergency meetings. This almost came up a couple of years ago during the snowpocalypse year. Emergency meetings, we have to give as much notice as possible given the time and circumstances of the meeting. We have to notify all members of the council to do that, and then to convene an emergency meeting, the majority of the council has to agree to hold that meeting, and we have to keep minutes and everything else. So in the event that we can't contact the majority of the council, if we're not able to convene a meeting, and to convene a meeting, we have to have a quorum. So if we still need to have some type of action taken, the mayor would have to declare a state of emergency and then take action, which then requires council approval within 30 days. And so it gets a little bit convoluted depending on what the emergency is and how many people are available to go to the meeting. And then finally, for violations, they can be fairly substantial. If a member of the council knowingly or intentionally violates the OPMA or tries to circumvent the provisions of that, it's a Class B misdemeanor. And potentially whatever action is taken in the meeting is voidable if there's a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So that's significant because if we're ratifying a contract or purchasing or selling real estate or some other type of transaction, if a court determines there was a violation of the Open Meetings Act, that transaction would be void. It would be of no legal effect. So that could have some serious repercussions. So obviously we do our best to comply with all of this. The state auditor has some really good training resources online that you can take just sort of at your will. I put the link up there and that's a great resource to look at and just sort of refresh. If you have any questions, feel free to call Polly or I to get specific answers on that. And other than that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, I might make a comment, which is, in my experience, all of the people who are subject to this are extremely conscious of it and do a very good job of complying with it. So, we're good citizens in that regard. Anybody else have any questions or comments on? Joe?
Thanks, Cameron.
Annalise is shaking her head, but I'd like to bring up a somewhat allied subject, which is there's a recent requirement which has kind of the same theme, which has to do with openness of and potential conflicts of interest on listing assets. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm
Is this-
assuming you're talking about the disclosures that were.
Disclosures.
Yeah, so I will admit, I don't know a lot of the background on that. The requirements were new this last year in the 2024 legislative session. And so they added requirements that were already there in the state code for when an official declared candidacy for public office. The difference is now they have made the requirements annual, so you have to disclose them when you file for candidacy and when you take office and annually thereafter. And the town is required to keep 4 years of those records. I will agree that the disclosure requirements are pretty extensive and pretty intrusive, at least on a couple of issues.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that the legislature made those decisions because of the number of incidents, not necessarily in our town or other municipalities, but I think generally in politics across the country, where politicians benefit significantly from financial transactions over areas that they regulate or have knowledge about. And so I think what this is designed to do is to just sort of clear that and make the public aware of whatever information that there may be that would be relevant to potentially some action that a political body would take. And so they're requiring more extensive disclosures, and we have to post them and keep them for 4 years.
So we're kind of drifting into agenda item number 8, so we just deal with this now? Would that be okay?
Number 8,
Number
Yeah.
8,
yes, let's do that,
since we have Cameron.
right?
Well, the new form looks good to me. This rule was actually signed by the governor last March. So I was a little surprised that we hadn't heard it or had any kind of heads up it was coming. It's not the end of the world. I mean, it's just a little more detail than we've been asked to provide in the past. I like the way the new form looks, but I did get out the old annual, which included the ethical pledge. The ethical pledge is the form that has all the definitions on it. And it seems to me that these two forms, at least the ones in the past, have worked together, kind of arising and ceasing, one begets the other. And so I wasn't sure the new form had yet married the ethical pledge, but they really kind of need to be executed together. So I was just asking what's your plan for that?
Yeah, Cameron and I talked about that, and so the way for now we were gonna deal with it is that the old form stays because that applies. We have staff and all appointed officials and everyone fills out that form. This new thing only applies to elected officials. So we were gonna you would actually be signing both, which may be slightly repetitive, but just for lack of redoing both forms and redoing that, we just thought that was simplest in the short term, is to keep the old one on the books. Have everybody that needs to sign that, and then this one is just gonna be added.
The old one, including the disclosure element of the old one, not just the ethical pledge of the old one.
We've kept it the same, we did not add it in.
And we'll fix that next year or something. So I assume you're gonna send us an email with that form.
I wanted to see what happened today, and then I will.
I'm prepared to move that we adopt this or this resolution and move forward with accepting the changes the state's mandating. We really have no choice.
Yeah.
And then that green lights these guys to get the forms lined up and sent to us so that we can fill them out before. We only really have like 3 weeks to do it.
I'll second that.
Okay, and it only applies to elected officials, not staff, correct?
This form, correct.
The new form only applies, the new more rigorous disclosure form only applies to elected officials. But the use of the combined ethical pledge, the old disclosure form and the new form is kind of the road that I think we're gonna be on. And that only applies to elected officials.
Okay. Any further
I said that right?
discussion?
Yeah, I'm just like debating, like, what's in it for the government to know what the elected officials, like, the complete disclosure, like, what difference does it make? What do you?
And it's not just the government that knows, I mean, I think one of the big things about the new law is that. You know, not only, I think we're required to post it, but then the state's gonna post it far and wide.
Yeah,
And
these
And
are,
everyone's gonna
these
know,
are public,
it's a public thing.
Yeah, it's still a public document.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, more so than in the past.
and that's seemingly like not fair. I don't understand why they decided that it was a good idea to do that. That was my curious face looking at you, John.
No, I hear you, it seems odd.
Like,
It's because there's been a lot of controversy over insider trading from particular elected officials, Supreme Court officials and other things like
Maybe not
that.
so much the state legislature.
And it's been a big brouhaha, so I just think they're trying to get out ahead of it.
Rightly or wrongly, it's been a bit of a label attached to the gondola too. That the people that actually approved the gondola funding originally
Or the,
are gonna stand to benefit from the
Right.
gondola being built.
Yep.
So,
But this is kind of closing the barn door after after the horse is escaped, so.
well, you know, I do think that it's weird, I was trying to decide whether, cause there's one section that's optional about real property. And I say, well, okay, I'm gonna opt out.
It's optional.
Except that it's optional unless you think it may cause a conflict, and I was thinking, you know, do I really need to disclose the various property holdings I have in Alta? Like I own, I think 7 different things in Alta. But I suppose somebody could suggest that I had a conflict of interest and, you know,
But they can suggest
voted
that.
in favor of the residents or something, cause it was gonna be beneficial to me on a personal level. Like voted to reduce property tax or something like that. And so I think that the answer is you probably should disclose your real estate. If you're gonna still be on the council.
They can suggest that either way. No matter which way you answer it, they can still make the suggestion.
Right, just the one way you're covered.
Right.
But if you've disclosed it, they can't then come back and say that you had a conflict of interest. Is that right, Cameron?
Well,
It may be a conflict, but you've disclosed it.
I think you've raised a number of good points. Let me just touch on briefly. Carolyn, I agree with you 100%. It is unfair. It is an intrusion onto the privacy that the rest of the public has, right? But there is a trade-off when you voluntarily become a public official. You have to, give your address. You have to give a phone number to contact, and this is sort of an expansion of that. And I agree with you. I was a little surprised by the requirements, but I think they make sense given the history of political transactions in the country and even here in the state. And John, I think you raised an excellent point as well. The one thing I want to bring up is the disclosures for elected officials is at the time you take office, each January or preceding year. That's when it's effective. There is still an ongoing duty to declare a conflict or a potential conflict if a transaction comes before the council. And so I think that's the sort of second backup to the disclosure is if there's a matter that comes before the council where a council member has a business interest or a property interest or serves on a board on something, I think that when that transaction comes up under a separate state law, you're required to disclose that potential conflict. And so I think between the two, it's designed to catch as many as it can. And so I've been, with several sets of council members and several mayors. I've never seen anyone intentionally try and circumvent that. I feel like council members have always been excellent about disclosing, potential conflicts of interest when they work for a business or something like that. So between the annual disclosure and the ongoing duty to declare a potential conflict, I think we would be covered.
Right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there also an obligation that if the situation changes materially during the year, you have an obligation to update your disclosure form? It's not like you get to wait for the next annual one to make the change, you go to bed one night, you wake up the next day, you inherited the Snow Pine Lodge. You probably need to tell somebody.
That's correct. Yeah, or you know, if you're holding some obscure stock and it has a you know an IP release and it quintuples in value or something like that. But yeah, and the $5,000 market value is the threshold for those.
But it doesn't seem to make you say how much of each stock you own, just that you own it.
Correct.
So I think there's some comfort in that.
No numbers, just.
No numbers, just the name of the stock. And some you're to describe Pfizer for them or something else.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, it's painful, but.
Less intrusive because they're not looking for numbers. If they were looking for numbers, then.
Not good.
Yeah.
Okay, any further discussion on this item? Shall we just,
And we should vote.
I think we should too.
It seemed like John was trying to make a motion, Carol kind of seconded, but it was not very clear. Do you guys want to kind of redo that?
Oh, I thought-
Or-
No,
It
it's very
pretty
clear. He motioned, she seconded.
Yeah,
Right, I motion that we approve 25 R1.
I second John's suggestion that we adopt resolution 2025 R1, implementing elected officer conflict of interest disclosure to comply with legislative changes to Utah law.
thank you very much. I'll do a roll call vote for you.
All right, good,
Mayor Burke,
yes.
Councilmember Ansel,
Yes.
Councilmember Byrne,
Yes.
Councilmember Morgan,
Yes.
and Councilmember Schilling.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes, or resolution passes. All right, I saw Mike Mon in here earlier. Is he on the,
I don't believe you
was.
saw him in there.
I thought I did, okay,
He's coming.
There he is.
all right. Mike, you wanna give us a rundown on,
Sure,
we now have snow?
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great,
Oh.
thank you for accommodating us, we're traveling back from, been at Mountain Collective meetings up at Jackson and today at Grand Carnegie. And good thing is I'm not driving, so you have to worry about that. I'm the passenger,
Good.
it's there. But just a little update, you know, we started this season with some early snow and then it was dry. And we had limited snowpack. You know, we got to December 19th and we had the lowest snowpack that we've had at that time of the year in the past 10 years. That's as far as back as it's looked. We were a little concerned going into the Christmas holidays with that low snowpack. We had limited reservations the week before to about 80% of our capacity. So we decided going into the holidays to limit the reservation capacity so that we could not get overrun too much. But fortunately, it started to snow. We got a fair amount of snow. It puts snow onto a weak snowpack, so it still limited the amount of terrain that we had. And we're still kind of recovering from that. Today, you know, we got the backside open, and yesterday, Catherine's. We had to tiptoe into those because we had a layer of really rotten snow out of everything. And so it's, even though we got a lot of snow earlier in the holiday period, kind of kept snowing, didn't allow us to get the work done that needed to be done. Aviation standpoint. Unfortunately, you know, we just with Christmas and New Year's following in the middle of the week, we kind of had a 2-week holiday period rather than a 1-week holiday period. And even with the restrictions that we had fairly good numbers. So overall, this holiday period may be, you know, just about as good as last year's holiday period. Number-wise, we were trailing last year's numbers fairly significantly. We cut that probably in half, maybe this past week, catching up. So we're moving in the right direction. We're still, in terms of visitation, business, and revenues, you know, we're behind last year, but we're kind of like a third of the way through the season at this point in time. So we still have 2 thirds. We'll see how that plays out. You know, we had 3 really significant red snake days during the holiday period. You know, the first one, road was just slick from snowbird all the way to the mouth of the canyon. Made it hard for even people with the right vehicles to travel down. But we were gridlocking out to about 2.5 to 3 hours before we started to move on that day. Even though the main line was open, the second one came in. Main line was closed, I believe, on that one. It was a similar situation. It took a while to get everybody out. The difference being that the road was not fully ice packed into the canyon. It was just wet kind of over half the canyon. But the fact that everybody had to focus through the main line, through the bypass road, it's interesting. If you say that traffic's traveling at 30 miles an hour below entry one, that means you got to divide it, cut it in half at every entry point. And if you just work your way back from entry one, okay, it's 15 miles an hour. Entry two now it's 7.5 miles an hour, and so forth. When you get back to Alta with just using 4 or 5 entries points on the bypass route, our speed is 0.3 of a mile an hour. So it really shows that impact of all those entry points. The last one we had was just last week, and we had this storm come in. It was a really challenging day, and because it was a storm came in or a commuter special coming up the canyon, it really reduced the number of vehicles in the canyon, and it also resulted in the Superior lot was not open. There was no roadside parking. Main line was closed. But, there was some great communication and teamwork that day. We were trying to run plows, our equipment early in the morning to keep the road open between Alta and Snowbird town. We ran our plow equipment late into the morning in our parking lots because we didn't have a ton of people. And then I really appreciated Mike Murray's lead, and he worked with UDOT. And when we ended up that day with this midday road closure that was going to happen and was called off, then was thrown in at the last minute. So we ended up with a road closure that had no advance notice to the public. We just really closed the road. We did mitigation work, got the road by 4:30. And Michael Murray was very beneficial and instrumental in allowing all the Alta traffic to start moving and not opening the entrance over until we had gotten some cars Alta down to entry one. That allowed a significant amount of cars from Alta to get down the canyon in a very recent time. We still ran into it taking about 3 hours, 2.5 hours to empty the canyon. But the thing that was different is because we didn't have all those entry points, traffic was continually moving. We never got to gridlock. Snowbird assisted on that day by closing entry 2. So Snowbird didn't have, there was no Superior lot parking or roadside parking. They had a limited amount of parking going on the bypass. So Snowbird actually emptied. We were watching on the cameras. They emptied their lots about 6:30. So we were about 7 to 7:15. So it was more of an equitable accident, and it was less frustrating for people if traffic was at least moving rather than being full window. So thank you very much, Mike Murray, and helping that to occur. And we're continuing to try to work with UDOT on trying to just make the conversion of traffic out of Alta. It's there. It's gonna have that went. We're up, like I said, we're up and growing. The things that was brought up in the planning commission is that I believe the Strongs estate has proposed some condos or a condo hotel type approach. And we have reviewed what they've done. We're supportive in concept of what they're proposing. That was recently reinforced when we were up here in Jackson. New owners of Jackson Hole were sharing their vision for the future, and they intend to they want to expand their base, build out Teton Village. They said they're going to add a couple of hotels and some condos, and they said the only way you can do it in today's age is to go to have a condo hotel type deal. And they have also indicated that they were going to be able to do that development and do it in a way that the condo district is not didn't have the, rented out, it's not using, it had to be rented out, it couldn't be dark rooms for a certain amount of the season, so it appears that that is alive and well and happening in other communities. I would just encourage the town councils that if they move in that direction, that we try to figure out how to do what others are doing and requiring condos to be used and not use. So it's there. The other thing in that regard is just in the, if the Shrubs Estate is coming in for approval for whatever the change in the zoning, moving up forward with their agreement. Just a reminder that there's a lot of issues that we would hope that the town would require the estate to have worked out for the approval. There's easements on the that property that can be addressed. Their access, how they will access it, the water, fire suppression. It seems like it makes sense that all those things get addressed and agreements made before we start to make changes or exceptions to it. So that's a wrap up. Council Skeeter, any questions?
I have a question regarding the road. So as you know, I have a really great view of the parking lot. And so I was fascinated by the fact that the parking lot at Alta took such a long time to fill up on Saturday and Sunday. And what I learned writing the lists from multiple different people was that UDOT actually staged a mid-canyon turnaround. And that people who even had stickers, but if they swerved too much, they were turned around. And and sent back down, which, oh boy, I think that's fantastic. And I'm wondering, Mike, if you heard any of that feedback from any of your customers or how you looked at the slow filling of the lots on Saturday and Sunday. And whether that affected like going down Canyon or, and also thank you for leaving the lifts open much later on Saturday. That was such a fantastic day and I really loved the last half hour.
Well, thank you. You know, we're trying to be very cognizant of what's happening in the canyon and trying to make it work for our skiers, whether, you know, letting them know there's going to be congestion, encourage them early departure, having the lifts be open in the morning. We haven't had a lot of negative feedback. We have got feedback that the checking, while it's good, it is creating significant congestion on days that they're checking if there's a rush, you know. So we are hearing some of that and trying to take that all into consideration. We have noted that by us restricting reservations, you know, we're in the Mountain Collective, for example. And for the first time since the collective started, the visitation to Alta on the Mountain Collective for this last month is less than snowbirds. And we think that's because, you know, they couldn't get reservations. So we are seeing some impact in some ways of that, but we still are committed to, you know, trying to match the demand of the terrain we have available for people to access. And you know, one thing that was really clear to us too during that storm, one of those storms, was it's not necessary that the vehicles. We have a similar problem with the drivers. So many of these drivers are not comfortable driving in these winter conditions. And so, you know, an alternative of some sort near the mouth of the canyon. I've had some thoughts lately that we should try to, you know, maybe where that gondola station was proposed to be built, at least a parking lot should be built there. It's serviced by buses or some other means, so that these people that come and they've rented a car, and probably they went with the canyon, they're really terrified of driving it. So have an alternative, because we really don't have an alternative right now for the number of people who come in that situation. So it seems like we need to come up with something that can help them not have to put car.
Interesting.
Any more questions or discussion with?
Well, I sure want to applaud the discipline that
Yes.
Mike and ASL have had with respect to limiting capacity. That's not easy to do.
Yeah,
And we appreciate your efforts in that regard, Mike.
yeah.
Indeed.
Thank you. We are at the point now, we're gonna open up to full reservation capacity.
We got more snow too.
And the mountain zone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I appreciate your joining us under kind of difficult circumstances. It was a bit hard to understand some of your dialogue, but nevertheless was very helpful and safe travels.
Thank you.
Okay.
See you, Mike, thanks.
All right, next on the agenda is questions concerning department reports. Not all at once.
I had a few questions about the accounting, and I submitted my questions in writing just to make things simpler. So I thought the report looked great, and the accounting looked great too.
All right. So how about approval of December 11 town council minutes and January staff and finance reports?
I move that we approve the December 11, 2024 town council meeting minutes and January staff and financial reports.
I second, Dan's suggestion of approving.
Any discussion? Okay, we have to roll. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay. Unopposed, so we have now approved those reports. All right, so that takes us to the mayor's report.
Get astronomical.
We'll get there, we'll get there.
Yeah.
Wait till the sun.
I cut to the chase scene.
First of all, I want to thank Elise for her usual great job of filling in for me last month. And remotely doubling as a single mommy at that. Makes me wonder, just superfluous this whole thing. You're not. And I assure you that I would far prefer to be here over where I was, which is flat on my back with scalpel armed surgeons hovering over me. So. All right, so when I started writing this down, the thing that struck me was the obvious, which is that it's 2025.
Yes.
Okay. And that at the end of this year will be a quarter of the way through this century. Yeah, wow. You know, how can a century pass so quickly? And wasn't it just a few years ago, we had all this kerfuffle over the Y2K.
I didn't say Y2K.
And the, you know, the computers are gonna lose their mind because they only had 2-digit years and all that sort of stuff. So what happened to all that stuff? And so I started to think about what happened in this quarter century that's just about gone by. And one of the things that happened is on this plot. Now, this plot doesn't, this only goes from 2004 to 2022, I think. But it's interesting. The black curve is the population of the Salt Lake, of Utah. Okay, and you see it's rising steadily. And in fact, Salt Lake County grew by about a third, 300,000 people in that period. And of course, a fraction of those, a good fraction, solid fraction of the 300,000 people want to come skiing because that's why a lot of us live here. But look at the red curve. That's the number of skier visits. And that has just skyrocketed. And it kind of took off after COVID. Because a lot of people figured out that they could work from home. And home didn't have to be in San Francisco Peninsula, it could be in Cottonwood Heights or West Delta. And so you could, you know, yeah, there you are. And so the skier visits reflects more than the population increase. It reflects people who are making their second homes, first homes. And if you're livelihood depends on skier visits. You find that red curve, man, that warms your heart. On the other hand, if your municipal services and funding through tax base is proportional to the black curve, you're in trouble. Because you have more services, more service demand and not increasing revenue source for that. So, and we're obligated to provide services to those people. So I think this is kind of trouble. Now, some other things that have happened in this century, past quarter century, is that Alta's gone from 8 lists to 5. Isn't that interesting? The actual number of lists has gone down. And as far as I can remember, there were no high-speed detachable lifts in the last century. They're now, all but Wildcat are back.
Yeah, here,
Yeah,
not here.
yeah, here.
But they were invented in the 90s.
Yeah, but they weren't installed here, as far as I remember. My horseback estimate is that the uphill capacity here is increased by about a factor of 2 in the fourth century. I didn't calculate that carefully, but it seems about right. Now, meanwhile, the bus capacity has declined.
Yeah.
I mean,
By a third, 2/3.
yeah, or something like that.
It's a little over 2/3.
So this is a mismatch. Okay, meanwhile, Wolcott Canyon has not gotten any larger. That's a matter of fact. So we're collectively trying to fit more people into the same space. And at some point, that's not gonna work anymore. And we may even come there by now, I don't know. We're gonna have to figure out a way to limit the cars coming out the canyon. And Mike's way was kind of reduce the number of parking reservations. That worked for a while. Right now, the limitation is inconvenience and congestion. And that might be the mechanism forever, I don't know, maybe not, we'll find out. Now, change.
Hey, Roger, are these numbers from Ski Utah?
Yeah, what is the source?
Yeah,
What's the source?
I was wondering how that data is collected, because
Yeah.
is it a per person skiing, or am I just one dot on that, or do I get a point for every day I ski?
I think you get a point for every day I see, but I will look up that.
Do it, please.
Yeah, I will look up that reference and get that.
Because I also think the differentiation is, when it's I see visits, does that mean foreign visits or local skiers as well?
No, I think it's foreign plus local.
Okay.
That's my impression.
Fidelity, that'd be helpful.
That looks like it could be a compilation of day visits per ski area to me, just
Yeah.
based on the numbers that, are available.
And I wanna know Little Cotton Canyon visits.
Well, I don't have that, and I don't know how we can get that.
Yeah.
This is Utah, postal,
Skier visits.
right, Utah.
Yeah, I think another part of the mechanism we're starting to see play out, and that is that the customers are beginning to reject the experience.
Yes.
And complain about the day skier experience. Thank God, not as so much here,
No.
but certainly Park City
Yeah.
and others,
Yeah.
Park City and others, and I think you're starting to see some pushback. And ultimately, maybe that leads to less mega pass sales, because it seems like
That'd be nice.
all of these issues are so closely tied to the onset of mega pass.
Yes, in fact,
Experience.
that jump in that curve is not just coincident with COVID, but it's about the time when these mega bass sales came out.
Right, and it's starting to be a bit of a black mark for the skiers. They're just wide open, except like I think Alpha's done a nice job of managing and taking the base pass off the weekends and the other little fine tunings they've done, more blackout dates, and so
Yeah.
the mega passes, we're kind of tolerating it reasonably well. But some of the other skiers haven't done such a disciplined job, and I think they're suffering for it.
I think
And
so too.
ultimately, hopefully that'll lead to a change in buyer behavior.
They're certainly getting into the press.
$325 a day for one person to ski.
Yeah,
will that make,
we'll,
Power lines,
Scotty.
Scotty, and they had 20% of the terrain open.
yeah,
That's the mind blower, is that you had like this max crowd and 20% of the terrain open, holy
no
smokes.
control to pick you up when you fell down?
There was an interesting article in Town and Country, not that I subscribe, but I was sitting in the Green Bay, Wisconsin airport yesterday. For about 2 hours. And I was just looking at the magazine rack and it was a front article, which was what has happened to skiing in the United States and the price pain
Yeah.
is part of that, and the rise of the private resort was part of this too. But I think there's a pain point for our skiing community that we service and we have some responsibility to, and it's the experience downgrade and the price pain. And we'll see what happens, right?
Well, we sure hope that the long-term solution isn't pricing people out of the sport.
Right, and that's
I
what,
think that would
that's
be-
just on the article, was we're pricing people out, it is
But-
strictly rich folks.
and what is one of the responses to that, and that is more backcountry skiers.
Yeah, that's been a response, that has been
Yeah.
and COVID accelerated that too.
Yeah.
Correct.
But part of the other escalation or migration demographically to the wealthier skier is the loss of buses as well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
You know, we talked about, as a kid, I caught a bus up here. But we caught the bus
Yeah, cut the bus.
until I started driving illegally underage.
But the bus wasn't a $50 bus. Like the gondola is gonna be a $50 ride, so I'm not sure who that's helping. I mean, it's not gonna be, it's not gonna help that.
I shouldn't laugh, but you're right, that's part of where I think.
What hourly employee's gonna be able to pay $50?
Yeah, just to get here,
You can't make it work.
so that's really helpful, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so, still on the 25-year theme. The global average temperatures has increased by 1/10 of a degree C. Now, that doesn't sound right, 1/10 of a degree C, you can hardly feel that, but when you fathom the amount of energy that it takes to heat the entire atmosphere by that much, that is a hell of a lot of energy. Okay? And we don't know exactly how that will affect any given place, including Little Cottonwood Canyon. But the forecast is for more frequent, more intense weather events. And we read about them occurring across the world all the time. Think about tornadoes in California, record high temperatures in Arizona, 903 inches of snow here one year. And, we don't really kind of think about this until it becomes personal, as it did this morning when I got a pre-dawn call that said, our California house is under mandatory fire evacuation. That kind of
In January.
right now, today,
yeah,
this morning. Okay, so as far as we know, the house is still standing. But that gets your attention.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so most of this will not affect necessarily where you live tomorrow, but it will affect us all over the next few years, and we don't even know exactly how. And it pertains to Molly's job, which is to develop an emergency preparedness plan for us next month.
So, you're on.
yeah,
Let's go. So, and on to an astronomy note.
okay,
The days are getting longer, about 1 minute of daylight per day.
Yeah.
So, it's not that you really notice all that, but it's nice to stop and take stock every quarter century. And see where we're going, so hope somebody will remind me in 2050, we'll do it again.
Thank you, Roger.
that's very right.
Well, entertainment value too. Okay,
Business.
new business, yeah. And one piece of new business that these two folks were in on was this resort park caucus today.
Right.
You wanna say anything about that?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing that up. I thought you might, and something that you said about the disclosure rules changing and the bill was signed in March. And I actually went back and looked at the minutes from April when our lobbyist Shelley Tusher attended the meeting to do an update. And of course, you know, the 2025 legislative session is on the doorstep. It's like, I think it starts in 2 weeks. The three of us did join Utah League of Cities and Towns Reserve Communities Caucus Zoom call today, where the league presented on, took feedback on a variety of topics that they think are maybe particularly relevant to resort communities. So just on the topic of that change occurring, and I assume that was an outcome of an active legislature. It didn't come up in our minutes in April. It did, and so maybe it was reported on, but I guess I just present that as an example of like what a cluster the legislative session can be. Especially if you're in local government, because so much of what the legislature does is, I mean, right, the legislature makes rules about what government does, and we are a political subdivision of the state. So anyways, there's a lot to keep track of, and we did join this League of Cities and Towns call. I think you may have seen in the news that the House Majority Leader said that the focal points for this session are housing and energy. There will be a lot of housing bills, so that will be a hot topic that a lot of local governments are tuning in on. There are a lot of housing requirements that don't apply to us, like requirements to have housing plans, and those aren't just like bookshelf items. You actually have to, change your regulations and your fees and all that to make room for the plan to be enacted. So while some of those requirements don't apply to us because we have fewer than 5,000 residents, we don't need a housing plan. There are plenty of other requirements that might apply to us, and there are a couple of things that the league have highlighted that we'll need to be on the lookout for, such as potentially a requirement in a bill that is actually already numbered and filed to require local governments to allow housing in commercial zoning districts, which of course we don't do in Alta, unless employee housing might exempt us from that provision. So that's something that we're watching. Sounds like that might not be like the first housing bill that passes, nor the last. But anyways, we're 2 weeks before the session. I wish we had come to you with like a more comprehensive legislative update. That certainly, local governments have legislative programs. We do have a lobbyist. So anyways, the next time we get together, the council will be, about halfway through the session. And I hope we can provide you a little bit more of an update on whatever comes up that might affect the town. I don't think they're like most of the other topics they presented on. There are some things coming down the pipe for short-term rental regulation, which actually sounded like if you want the ability to regulate short-term rentals, these would be a good thing, and I think they'd be like a modest improvement in our ability to or keep track on who is doing short-term rental businesses with and without business licenses, in their own zoning district, whatever. So that's a hot topic. There may be some action on tourism taxes and how those taxes get distributed between levels of government, state, county, local, and what they can be spent on, which would presumably be a positive for local governments. And so forth. So actually, it didn't sound to me like there were any big negatives coming our way, at least by their summary of it in this meeting. The Legislative Policy Committee is like a really powerful sort of lobbying unit that the League of Cities and Towns convenes. They have bi-weekly meetings all year, and they have weekly meetings on Mondays at the Capitol. It's mostly comprised of elected officials, mayors and council members, and then attorneys or legislative directors, managers, whomever. And you all do have the ability to serve on that if you'd be interested. In order to be a voting member, we have to appoint you, but that's a non-thing, a non-issue. So I did just want to extend that opportunity. We talked about having it on the agenda, but we didn't get it on there. Currently, I believe it's Roger, I'm actually on there, but in my previous role, we haven't updated the roster, and then Cameron are our voting members. But if anybody on the council would like to participate, it is awesome networking, it's awesome, just general education, and it's an opportunity to have a real impact, so.
Is that only during the season of the session?
No, I mean, the LPC meets year round. I don't know what kind of like voting or action taking occurs outside of the session, but then in the session, I mean, it's a really impressive program. They've got this Slido is this app where you use a QR code and vote on you. They take, the league is a cool organization, and that's like the best way to participate, other than the conferences, which we should also get you guys to plug into, so.
Yeah, along those lines, one of the things that really surprised me in this job was how effective and professional the Utah League of Cities and Towns is. It's absolutely first class, and when you're exposed to it, it comes across without being pretentious. And the guy who leads it, Cameron Deal, is outstanding. So if you might think about attending their, not just their legislative policy committee meetings, but the mid-year conference, which is in St. George in April. Jen's gonna shudder thinking that, oh my God, he's gonna spend all the money on people sending them.
I went to the one that was here in Salt Lake. I think that's the fall one. I can't remember. I went to it a number of years ago. It was amazing. I learned a lot. They have like classes on like learning to be a land use authority member, or they have different sessions. We had a really good a really good speaker that talked at the luncheon. But it was it was a pretty good thing to go. I think I only went for the one day. It was pretty amazing. But yeah. If anyone wanted to go, it's pretty cool.
It is a high quality event. So I've been very impressed with it. And I forgot to mention the keynote speakers are, knock your socks off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the bill speaking up, I was surprised when I read the staff report. I was like, how could we not be aware of this? And it looked like the governor signed it in March, and went back to the bill history and all of its things. It had a fairly rough ride through the legislature. There were like 25 hearings or something.
I remember. Is it Shelley, our lobbyist? I remember her talking about it to us in the spring. And we were a little kind of taken aback by it, I think. But it's a little invasive. But at the same time, I think like Cameron was saying, you disclose other things when you're a public official. They're just asking you to disclose more now.
Yeah, I think that one of the big issues that it would be interesting to shine a light on is the whole taxation issue of lift ticket redemption on Mega Pass redemption.
Yes.
Which is, now they say half of the skiers are Mega Pass. If you think about it, we've never really gotten taxed when a season pass holder scans his pass. We get taxed when he buys the pass because they're a local person. The out of state, the thing that changes the out of state Mega Passers is we're not getting tax ever on that. And I think that's, when you look at Roger's graph, I think that's a tough paradigm for the long haul, and at some point, it would be good if we could, maybe get some legislative or governmental attention on that.
Yeah, right, and that's.
The county maybe is, what's that?
It create an opportunity for local governments to collect revenue based on past redemptions.
Yeah.
Elise, do you know any statistics on the number of people who purchase an Alta ticket from Alta itself, Alta pass holders versus Mega ticket holders? Do you know the percentages of those?
I haven't seen anything recently. But those people that do purchase things that are out of state, that's where kind of, and I know we're going to talk about this in the retreat tomorrow, We're gonna get a presentation on it, but that's where kind of the transient room tax comes in. I mean, there's other things that we can leverage to get taxes from people that are coming from out of state. They may have to stay in a lodge. And I know we're gonna talk about that a little bit more tomorrow, but there are a couple things that we can do besides sales tax that, will collect some of those things. We just have never leveraged them in the past.
And I should also say, we're eternally grateful for the incredible rise in sales tax that we've enjoyed. Most of which has been paid by the customers of the ski area and customers of the lodge. So, I don't wanna make it seem like we're ungrateful for that. And so far, that's kept up. But the question is what's gonna work in the future.
Yeah. Okay, and that's, kind of a note out to tomorrow. We're gathering here again at 8:30 to,
Vote to adjourn.
yeah. Move to adjourn, okay?
I'll move to adjourn. I was wondering if breakfast is at 8 or 8:30. Breakfast is at 8, the meeting's at 8:30. Yeah. Forget that's a lot, so.
We'll be ready to
We're
go.
gonna be ready for 8.
Ready, okay.
Well, if you want the first bear claw,
Okay, hold on.
X-Men.
Really?
I second the adjournment.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Are we meeting here or?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Yes.
Aye. Thank you.
I will see everybody tomorrow. Goodbye.
I saw that. I like your style. Somebody took to the big pile.
After.
I was gonna say that you kick my.
Well, that was, okay, right, sure.